Carsey here. In this question we're given the definition of two functions f and g, and we're asked to determine an expression for f of g of x. So let's first of all then look at that expression f of g of x and see what we can do with it. G of x is 5 minus x. So inside this function f, we can replace g of x by 5 minus x. That's the first step. Second step is, we look at f. We know what happens when x goes in. When x goes in, we take the square root of x and divide it into 1. If 4 went in, we'd take the square root of 4 and divide that into 1. If we put a in, we'd take the square root of a and divide it into 1. If we put 5 minus x in, we'll take the square root of 5 minus x and divide that into 1. And that's us done. That's an expression for f of g of x. So let's now have a look at the second part of this question. State the range and values of x for which f of g of x, that's this function here, is undefined. Now, when we put values into an expression like 1 over root 5 minus x, problems arise, well, from two cases really. If we're taking the square root of something, a must be positive or 0. We cannot find the square root of negative numbers as a real number. If we're wanting a real number answer, we can't take the square root of a negative number. So there's the first restriction. If we put in a value of x that made 5 minus x negative, then would be in difficulty. The other one is if we're dividing by a number, a cannot be 0. It's the first commandment of mathematics, thou shalt not divide by 0. It's impossible to divide by 0. So we have to watch out for these two things. So since we're dividing, we can't have the square root of 5 minus x being 0, and we can't have 5 minus x being less than 0. So for f of g of x to be defined, 5 minus x has to be greater than 0. If it's greater than 0, we're finding the square root of a positive number and we can divide that into 1, there's no problem. If 5 minus x was equal to 0, square root of 0 is 0, and thou shalt not divide by 0 would be dividing 1 by 0, not allowed. And if 5 minus x was less than 0, would have the square root of a negative number. That's not a real number, and therefore it's not defined. So for it to be defined, 5 minus x is greater than 0, which would imply, let's add x to both sides, 5 would be greater than 0, or written in the normal way, x would be less than 5. Read it backwards. 5 is greater than x is less than 5. So x is less than 5. So state the range of values of x for which this is undefined. So f of g of x is undefined. That's when it won't work for x greater than or equal to 5. I mean, you can check that by putting 6 in, for instance. 5 minus 6 is negative 1, square root of negative 1. That's not a real number. Let's try 5 itself. 5 minus 5 is 0, square root of 0 is 0. We cannot divide 1 by 0. So it's undefined if x is greater than or equal to 5. That's Mr. Carsey signing out. Hope you enjoyed the video.